Hello everyone, and I wish you all a very happy and kosher, as they say, meaningful and inspiring, emancipating Pesach, Passover. I welcome you all, everybody online, even down under, where they're probably almost preparing for Passover already. Closer to Passover, it's 15, 16 hours ahead. And I know there's someone that even listens in New Zealand, which is around 18 hours ahead. So it's a global situation here. Now, since they haven't discovered yet intelligent life outer space, for all we know, this is also being heard and seen in places we have not yet uncovered. So they'll also hear something about the Seder. You all probably know that my ongoing, mission and objective in this class is based on one word, and that word is relevance. It's a word from the Bible, Torah, relevance. It's all about relevance, relevance, relevance. One of the most important and vital, critical components that are missing today so often in religion and particularly in Judaism is its relevant message to each of us personally. How many people do you know will turn to a Torah or to a Seder for that matter or to any holiday when they are in need of psychological or emotional therapy? We'll go to a therapist. Well, we'll first go into denial, of course. Back to denial, it's called. And then when that doesn't work, we go for help. And we try to look for someone who has psychological insight or expertise and so on. And religious rituals and traditions, even if we have good positive experiences around them, don't necessarily speak to people in that type of psychological, spiritual, emotional way. Which right there, just in that one analysis, lies a major problem. So there's a dichotomy. There are people who've grown up in traditional Jewish homes, gone to Seders all their lives, know it inside out mechanically, but when it comes to emotional and personal growth, they don't necessarily look to the Seder, or for that matter, any other Jewish or ritual or tradition. So I'm here to try to correct that. I wouldn't say I'm the only one, but this has been my driving ethos of all the classes, of all my teachings, which is to try to create a bridge between the ancient tradition and contemporary relevance. And relevance in the context that address that these timeless and time-tested traditions, especially the Seder, is probably one of the most antiquated and oldest and ancient rituals, should speak to our hearts and souls about the things we struggle with today in our personal lives. So besides the wisdom and insight that we can glean from sources that go back thousands of years, there's something else that happens. Then religion also comes alive. The relationship with God and relationship with tradition comes alive because you see its relevance. So it has many benefits, and I'm convinced, based on my studies, when I had all these questions, and I did grow up in a home that was very traditional and to the T, to the point of even extreme in some ways, of cleaning the house for Passover, the Seder table. I always mention that humorous episode that to me captures so much of what many of us experience. I remember sitting at a Seder table with my grandparents, my mother's parents, and my parents and my family, and beautiful family Seder, and my uncles, a bunch of uncles, my mother's brothers. And when it came to drinking the wine, and there's the custom to recline, to lean, I remember my uncle decided that I wasn't leaning well enough, so he started pushing me like this, pushing my head down. He says, "Lean, you got to lean." So I said, "Why do you have to lean?" He says, "Because you got to be free. You got to be free." And he kept and there I realized the slavery of freedom, or the freedom of slavery, whatever you want to call it, that sometimes you become enslaved by the rituals, and without a clue, you just start getting so obsessed with them. Now, if he explained to me what the purpose is and what the meaning is in a loving way, he wouldn't have to push me. I would do it myself. The fact that it had to push me, which was, of course, I didn't need therapy for this, just for the record. But you amplify this many times over, and it gets into abusive, and it gets into silencing, and it gets into just imposing yourself upon others with religious ritual. It leaves not just a bad taste. It can actually leave wounds and scars of this type of religious addiction that closes us up to any of the beauty that may be in there. And I've encountered this sadly many, many times. And what I find, most people I meet, Jews, especially around the Seder and Passover, because Passover is just that ritual. People, Hanukkah doesn't have quite the same type of extremism. Hanukkah people like it's the gift season, the holiday season, whatever it may be. Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is days of awe. But the Seder is a classic brunt of most good jokes, Woody Allen type of jokes of the Seder, the boring Seders, the irrelevant Seders, the jokes, and that's why we wrote in the email, if you ask most people, or ask you, what would be your knee-jerk reaction? What word would you use to describe most of your past Seder experiences? Mechanical, ritualistic, dogmatic, a joke, tolerable, especially if it makes your parents happy, or intolerable, even though you're sitting with your family. These are most of the words that those are usually associated when people are honest about it. You rarely will find people say it was transcendent, transformative, inspiring, because it's a whole ritual. I'm not saying it can't be nice, nostalgic, warm, but to say that it has profundity and that it can open you up and free you from your own inner trappings and fears and inhibitions, very few people are going to say that that's the Seder they grew up with. And if you didn't have that, what the impression you are left with, that it doesn't have that message. Because if it did, someone would have told me. And most of us don't really go pursue and say, maybe there's a message I wasn't told. We turn into adults and then we build our lives. And, we may do the Seder out of tradition, out of responsibility, guilt, passing on something to our children. But the Seder is a rich, very rich and comprehensive system. There's 15 steps in the Seder. There's the matzah, there's the wine, there's the bitter herbs, there's the different things we say. You read in the Haggadah how the sages of old would stay up all night and talk about the Exodus from Egypt. And you start wondering what they talk about. How much can you talk about it? But if you start realizing that it's relevant, then then as much as you talk is not enough. Because then you find those messages and you're excited to spend the night and looking forward to be able to talk about it with friends and colleagues and family and so on. So we're here tonight to be able to somewhat decipher the secret of the Seder. Now I've done this in different ways in previous years. I actually we have a CD, Velvel just tells me, called The Soul, the Seder, 15 Steps to Personal Freedom, which I'm not going to do tonight, because I did it already. We have plenty of stuff on our website. The significance of these 15, we call the original 15-step program. 3 were dropped out, I guess, over the years. Then we have different discussions on the 4 cups of wine, the 3 matzahs, the Seder plate, and you can find most of this if you look on our website. We'll also be sending out an email that has the links to different Passover resources, and feel free to print it out and use it as you see fit. And as I said, I did over the last few different years different types of covering different elements of the Passover experience. So I thought that tonight, in this year's preparation, focus on 5 ways how you can transform your Seder. Everyone, whoever you are, and with some suggestions, whether you're a host or you're a guest, there are things you can do to make that evening more memorable. And when I say memorable, obviously the biggest goal would be transformative, which is a big word. But nevertheless, why not? Let's shoot for the top. That way, even if we don't get all the way there, at least we've gotten closer. So 5 steps to a transformative Seder, and they're all hinted to in the acronym of the word Seder, which is a 5-letter word, SEDER. And we'll get into that after a few introductions. First, most important introduction is to know that there's relevance in this whole sequence, this whole order. There's relevance to every step Jews have been doing this literally now 3,324 years ago is when they left Egypt. And ever since then, there's been a Seder. In the hardest of times and the best of times. Even during the Holocaust, Jews tried to do something for this, remember Passover night. And there are many different elements to Passover. It's actually a very intricate and comprehensive holiday. I'm going to assume that you know less, but whatever you know obviously could be helpful here. And again, I'm not going to cover it all because it's impossible to cover every part of Passover. There's not eating bread, there's the eating the matzah, all the reasons behind it. But there's a few central points that are critical to know before we even begin. The first is, I just said, that there is profound relevance, and that when you learn the secret code, and you'll see it's not such a secret once you learn it. You can open it up, and not just, you don't need me or other teachers, you can yourself be able to be empowered to look at a Seder and find ways to customize it and personalize it to your needs. As a matter of fact, no two Seders should even be alike. The traditions are similar, just like we may say the same prayers, sing the same songs, but the kavanah, the intention, and its application is very different. And when you learn to understand that relevance, you can see how it could be different addressing your needs this year as opposed to last year. So we say, Ma nishtana halayla hazeh, why is this night different than all other nights? We say that every year, which means every year it's different even from the year before. Not just different than all the other nights of the year. So every year has its particular needs. Every one of us is in a different place. Outside of Israel, we actually do 2 Seders. So you can even focus on different things in each Seder. So the first thing is you have the license, not only the license, the responsibility to make it relevant. That's also part of the ritual. That's the part they don't tell us. But that's also part of it, to make it personal and relevant. And you'll see it's actually implicit all over the Seder. The Seder, as you know, means order. That's what the word Seder means, an order. It's a 15-step structure. We also use a Haggadah. What is the word Haggadah? Haggadah is the manual or the booklet that we have at a Seder table. But do you know what the word Haggadah is? Does anyone know what the word means? It means to relate, to tell a story. In Hebrew, lahagid is to relate a story. Haggadah is a story, the story. So you can really translate Haggadah to story. But the interesting thing is, it's not just we're reading a story, we're reading a story in context of a dialogue. The bulk of the Haggadah, of the story, is a dialogue. Not just one person is telling the story, the other ones are listening. It's meant to be question and answer. That's why the Haggadah begins right after the first initial steps with questions, which again are just done mechanically. Kids learn by memorize them, they ask the questions, it's cute, it's nice, especially new children who just for the first time beginning to speak. But there's much more to it than just children participating. It's teaching children to ask. It's teaching children to have a conversation, to communicate. So if you really want to put Haggadah, you can translate it as communication. And we all know that's like the root of all issues, is when we're silenced, or when we are not allowed to communicate, or we feel we don't have the right to communicate. That's when most problems begin. Like they say, the silence is worse than the crime. Silence is worse than the rape, is sometimes the expression. You have the right and the ability and the obligation and the dignity and the validation to be able to communicate. The whole Seder is about communication. So in essence, more than any other, like for example, Yom Kippur is not necessarily a day of communication. Yes, you speak to God, but it's not sitting around a table with friends and family. It's more of a private time. It's a very serious time, day of awe. We fast, and it's introspection. But communication, Seder is the perfect situation. That's why you sit around a table. Having a Seder for one is not usually optimal, and a Seder focuses on also having guests, as we say in the beginning of the Haggadah, that this is the bread that we invite everyone who's needy to come into and celebrate with us. So it's a day of communication. And as such, that is one of the key first point I wanted to make was that to recognize that the Seder is meant to be there for you to be able to express, and for you to be able to grow. Now obviously it helps if you have like-minded kindred spirits around the table, because if you don't, it's going to be difficult to communicate. Nobody, it takes 2 to tango. It takes 2 to communicate. So if you insist on communicating, nobody else wants to do any communicating. They just want to knock off the Seder and get to the meal. So that's already that's more of that's politics that we have to work around, and we all need to, that's like in any situation. You go to a party, and you don't really find anyone to talk to, or at least something meaningful, so you got to figure your way. So I'm not suggesting to become all sour and serious. If that's the table you end up, so I'm sure you can find, if you're wise, some way to be provocative or some way to instill into the evening something. But that already, I'll address as I go here, that's already being creative. But obviously, optimally would be with people that you want to sit with. Or even if it's new people you've never met. But engage in conversation, and not in a corny way. There's no doubt if you bring up some question that intelligent people are sitting at the table, it's a conversation. That's class, that is Passover. Now obviously we don't just want to wander away from the tradition. There is a tradition. There's the 4 questions. But the 4 questions and they are defined questions, but they're meant to be a catalyst to a conversation. And after the children ask, and mind you, in many customs, the custom I grew up in, everyone's a child. Even adults ask the questions. And even adults whose parents have passed away ask the questions. Because we all are children this night, and we all are eager, and we're all seeking and curious to find out more. And then comes the second part. After the questions comes the answer. Now the answer is a traditional text. However, the text is meant to be not just the history of what happened, it's meant to apply it to our lives. And every part of the text is another application that we can learn from. So point number 2, which I think is critical, is what is the central theme of Passover? And after I've said the license obligation to personalize it, to make it relevant, what is the central theme of Passover? And when you know the central theme, you'll see how much easier it is to look at the different steps of the Seder, all different ways leading up to the central theme. Now we all know Passover is freedom, the holiday of freedom. The Jewish people were freed from Egypt. Some of you may be familiar with this. If not, I'll state it here. Yetziat Mitzrayim, leaving Egypt, is not just an event that happened thousands of years ago. We read in the Haggadah that in every generation, and every day actually, we have to be recreating, imagining as if we just left Mitzrayim, Egypt. The question is, what does that mean? If you think about it, the meaning is simple, but also changes the entire landscape of what the Seder is about. It means, the word Mitzrayim, first the question, why should we, the Jews suffered enough. They left Egypt thousands of years ago. Why do we need to write and vision as we're leaving Egypt again? What's the point of that? It's okay, we could commemorate it, remember what happened to our ancestors, acknowledge the blessings, the miracles, freedom. Obviously a moral thing to do is to remember your blessings and acknowledge them. But why recreate it? Why do we have to recreate it? Why do we have to eat bitter herbs? They're done with that. They were freed from that. And we still have to remember that. Why? And the answer is in the word Mitzrayim. The Hebrew word for Egypt is not Egypt, it's Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim means constraints, inhibitions, barriers. So actually, what we're talking about here is a spiritual liberation. Liberation, what's the antithesis of liberation? Slavery. What's slavery? Slavery is addiction. Slavery is inhibition. It's fear. It's anything that demoralizes a person and keeps them trapped. It does not have to be necessarily a slave master with a whip. As a matter of fact, the worst type of slavery is internal ones, the psychological slavery. You can be a free human being and be mobile and be completely enslaved to your own passions, to your own fears, to your own paranoia, real or perceived. Those fears are much harder to free ourselves from, because no one's shackling you, you yourself are shackled. These are the psychological and emotional traps that each of us has. It can be fear, it can be inhibition, it could be silent, it can be loud. So whatever it is that is your Mitzrayim, it would be helpful to identify before you even enter the Seder. And then that changes everything. Because then you brought yourself to it. This doesn't mean necessarily you have to share all your Mitzrayims with everyone around the table. That's going to be up to you. There are Seders that turn into group therapy, but it doesn't have to be that way. That really, I think you could have group therapy without being official group therapy. There's ways to do that, but just communicating in a healthy fashion. So I'm not trying to turn this into purely a type of therapeutic experience. It's a spiritual experience. Spiritual experience can be therapeutic because it's about honesty and integrity, which is another trap. When you lie, when you have to be deceptive and duplicitous, that's another form of slavery. There's a reason we're that way. So identifying, so to speak, your Mitzrayims before going into the Passover Seder is a tremendous, not just tremendous, I think a prerequisite. Because then you're talking about relevance. And now comes a Seder is going to respond to and try to address some of your issues. Now, can it all be achieved and can you all find freedom in one night of a Seder after an hour or two? Not necessarily, but everything starts with steps. Awareness is half the cure of an illness. So the awareness that we have, and then focusing on different aspects of our own trappings, our own so-called forms of bondage and slavery, emotional and psychological, is a tremendous asset, but knowing what those elements are. And look, some of us may not even know what's blocking us. So fine. So bring that to the table in your heart and mind. Say to yourself, listen, I hope tonight, I may not know what blocks me. Maybe something will open up. So it doesn't always mean that you have to know, it's about being humble. Part of having integrity and being humble is saying sometimes I don't know what's the problem. I know there's a problem, but I don't know what it is. I know I'm not getting my desired results. I'm not sure why. That's what Passover was given to us as a gift. And when you look at it that way, Passover can become an indispensable tool to actually dealing with real stuff. And the beauty of it is that it has the power of thousands of years of tradition and history. It's not some new innovation someone came up with yesterday. And when you can dig into that history, that tradition, and not as an archaic, going a throwback to the past and trying to live in the past. I'm talking the exact opposite. Taking those time-tested traditions, applying it to our new situation, that has a lot of power. Because it has the power of ages, it has power of our parents and our grandparents and everything, and it's a cumulative power. And plus, that little bit that we add as we apply it to our own lives. So those are two introductions. The relevance, so we need to know there's relevance, and the Passover is all about that type of freedom. And every step of the 15 steps is meant to lead toward there. Now, on a practical note, obviously, as I said, depending whether you're a guest or a host, affects obviously what you can do at a Seder, what you can do. But either way, it's always good to be with people who have similar ideas, or, as I said, even if it's surprises and people you've never met. But if it's an environment where it's not just a joke and frivolous, which unfortunately many Seders end up being that way, you can always contribute. Here, as I said, you're going to have to be a little creative, depending who else is sitting there, and seeing what you can figure out. If you're a host, there's some of the suggestions I'm going to make here, and some that you may read online, if you look into it. Ideas of how you can engage people into a conversation, posing a provocative question and letting everyone just answer it. And the question should always be around relevance. Like, what would be the relevance of eating matzah, for example? And if you do a little homework, you'll find the relevance. As I said, I'm going to focus now on 5 methods or 5 ways that one can transform the Seder based on the acronym. And after following these introductions, so we're going to go now through these 5 steps. And this really goes across the board. Is, I guess, both central themes of the Seder and also attitudes and things you can address, you can bring to the table to the Seder table. So we'll start with the S of Seder, okay? The S, and S, of course, can be a symbolism of many words, but I think the one that stands out most and most important is to speak. S for speak. Haggadah means to speak. Lahagid, to tell, relate. Pesach means to speak. Pesach is made up of 2 words. Pesach, a mouth that speaks. So, how many people know that? Why is speaking so important? Well, often to appreciate something, you have to look at the opposites, the contrast. Silence. Throughout history, the totalitarian regimes, the tyrants, the people wanted to control us. What was the first thing that they demanded? Well, they demanded silence, acquiescence. This is how it is, and you cannot challenge us. And any type of protest, any type of speaking up, was considered a travesty, was considered a mutiny, and was duly punished. mind control, to be able to the right to speak, which is one of the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech. Right? The most of all freedoms, freedom of speech, of the S of Seder. Goes back long before the United States became a country. The Haggadah, the Passover Seder, was to speak. We come together, not just to sit. As I said, it's not Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, it's not about so much your opinion. It's prayer. But on Passover, it's about speaking. I mentioned before that the whole Haggadah is based on the word Haggadah. It comes from a verse in the Torah that says, Ve'igada levincha. That when your children will ask you, you shall tell them. You shall speak to them. So speaking has both elements to it. It's both speaking, the teacher speaking, or the parent speaking, or the adult speaking, but it's also the child speaking. And that's why, as I said, the Haggadah is a dialogue. And imagine if we all trained our children from early age that they have a right to speak. And obviously with respect, and there's elders, people, there's a protocol. But no one is ever silenced. Something bothers you, you have someone to come to. Something, you have a question, you have someone to ask. You're never silenced, you're never dismissed. Imagine such an attitude called to speak. That is the dignity and the right that each of us has. And that's the S of the Seder, to be able to speak. And therefore, this evening of Passover, practically speaking, one of the key things to do is to speak up and also have others speak. Which is, if you're a host, that's what you want. You want to go around the table and let everyone introduce themselves. Some way say something, share something, and there's no such thing as somebody that has nothing to say. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says, who is the wise person? The one who learns something from everyone, which is really a double lesson, that everyone has something to teach and everyone has something to learn. There's no person on earth that can say, I've learned it all. No, there's more to learn, and every person has something to give. And interesting, in Jewish tradition, the mitzvah of charity, of tzedakah, is incumbent on all people, even on the poor. Even a person impoverished is obligated to give charity. The amount is already relative to the person's abilities. But think about that. There's no such thing as a person who's just a taker. There's no such a person who's just a recipient. Everyone has something to give. That's the message. The dignity of being able to say something. We all have our voice. Henry Thoreau wrote, most men lead a life of quiet desperation, and they die with their song still inside them. Well, as a Jewish people, I'm here to tell you that almost 4,000 years, we don't die with our song. We have a right to sing and a right to speak and a voice. And even before institutionalized freedom and democracy, we were speaking to the chagrin of many, and we were punished for it. When Mordechai spoke up and did not want to bow to Haman, he was punished. When Moses spoke up, Jews spoke up. They did not accept oppression as a given. And for thousands of years they would challenge the status quo and suffered as a result. But you know something? Who prevailed? We live in a world today we cherish freedom of speech. That was not cherished. That was not valued a few hundred years ago. Even if it was valued in someone's secrets of someone's heart, it was not a standard that we all could expect. So the word speak, which is the S for Seder, the first step, is a key component, which means, as we read later in the Haggadah, we read about the 4 different children. And we read even about the one that is skeptical and challenges and says, what are we doing here? Why are we reading this stuff? What happened? Why do we care? And the Haggadah speaks harshly about this person. It says, this is a person who's a infidel. And yet he's still sitting at the Seder, and without him the Seder cannot be complete. He's one of the 4. And every year, like someone once asked me, they said, you know what, why don't you, after the first year, this troublemaker, don't invite him to the next year's Seder. And we read in Haggadah again, these 4 children. Because you need this person there. Yes, there has to be an answer. But even the skeptic is part of the process. Because questions, communication is sacred. Obviously, you want to have healthy skepticism. You don't want just people who are using questions just to justify their position. So if someone dishes it out at the table, they should also be able to take it, and they're not just there to just be a rabble-rouser. But the other extreme, to silence people, is like silencing God. The dignity of every human being, the right to speak. And essence, that's the Haggadah. Haggadah means to speak. Haggadah, lahagid, to tell. Ve'gadato levincha. And we teach our children from young age. I know some people will say, one second, if you teach your children to speak up from young age, they're going to develop chutzpah, nerve. Chutzpah is more than nerve, but you get the idea. And they'll speak back, and they won't respect their elders. Well, let's take a look at the alternative. What's the alternative? To silence them. To not let them say anything. So as they grow up, they're taught, you can't ask questions. What does that do to a person? It invalidates them. It invalidates their spirit, it invalidates their voice. So I'm not suggesting, of course you teach children to speak, you teach them with respect, but you teach them that there's a dignity to their sanctity to their voice. And you tell them, ask the questions, and not just mechanically by rote. Ask. Ask and ask, and if you want to elaborate, do so. Teaching a child to speak is one of the most valuable things a parent can do. Because it's more than just speaking. It's about telling a child that you have value. You're valuable enough to say something. Yeah, now obviously you also teach a child. You ask a question, look for a wise person to give you an answer. Have a dialogue, have a discussion. But as the Baal Shem Tov says, for every question, there's an answer, and for every answer, there's another question. That's why the Seder keeps on going for now over 3,300 years. We already asked these 4 questions. Manishtana, we've been asking for 3,300 years, and we still ask it again. So if it's a mechanical by rote thing, okay, we do it for nostalgic purposes. But if you apply it to yourself, the answer is very simple. Why is this night different? It's different than the question was last year. We look for new depth, for new relevance, applying it to a situation today. We change in our lives. The needs we have emotionally and psychologically are not the same today as they were yesterday or last year. So we apply it to our lives. And we find new depth, and we find new meaning and new relevance. So the first step is to speak. You introduce that to the Seder, we don't even have to go to the other 4, and trust me, your Seder is going to come alive in a different way than usual. Now again, you have to be creative or innovative depending what table you're sitting at. As I said, I've been to Seder. I remember once at a Seder table, we had a few guests who got very restless very early on, and they thought they were going to have the meal immediately. And little did they know that was coming, and they thought, okay, now comes the wine. Oh, great, now comes the meal. No. Then another more reading. Then comes another cup of wine. No. Okay, then comes the matzah. Okay, now we're starting to eat. No. Then comes the moror. You get the idea. So I decided to be a little creative. I said to them, listen, come with me. So the rest of the people sat at the Seder. I took them into the kitchen, and I fed them well. Informally, I made it like, I said, don't tell anyone. This is like behind the scenes. So they felt validated. They didn't feel they have to just sit through. I saw they weren't getting it. And now they are people who actually keep the Seder and they love it. And they remember fondly that I broke the ice by letting them do something a little, we broke the law, so to speak. It always feels good to break the rules once in a while. Now, but my intention wasn't to break the rule. My intention was to make it personal. So that's what they needed. That's what we did. Now, this is not a license to all of you to do that. Try to be a little more, try to find some relevance in the Haggadah. But if it's needed, it's necessary, see it as the plan B. Okay? This has been recorded. I'm sure this will come back to haunt me when the Censorship Bureau begins to review the YouTube videos. Right, Ron? Okay. Absolutely. So the first thing is speak. Seder, the story. Speak the story. Okay. The next is empathize. Empathy. It's a good word, empathy. Now, how is that relevant, firstly, to the Seder? First of all, right in the beginning of the Seder, even before right after Kiddush, the first steps, we say the classic Aramaic, Hilach Ma'anya, with different songs. And we say, this is the bread of the impoverished, the bread of the poor that our parents ate in Egypt. And says, all who are in need, please come and join us. If you think about that, that's a powerful statement. We welcome everyone into our homes, stranger, friend. Obviously, be prudent about it. But that point being is that it's not just about me. Empathy is a gift, a blessing that we were blessed with, that we can sense another person's joy or pain. Again, you want to appreciate something, it's always good to look at the contrast. What would we be like if we had no empathy? We weren't capable of feeling another. Entire life would be different. There'd be no love. There'd be no sensitivity. It'd be just me. Passover, one of the central themes, it's not about me. It's not about you. That's why we begin with the Helach Manya, welcoming. That's why we eat matzah. Matzah is a sign of humility. The risen bread, the bread that rises, is a sign of an inflated ego. A lot of air. I don't know what the percentage, but there's a lot of air in a loaf of bread. Air. A-I-R. Air. It's inflated. It's rich. And it's also the symbolism of the maror. I mentioned before, why are we eating bitter herbs when we're not in Egypt anymore? We're already out of the slavery. Why do we have to be reminded? So it's interesting, when you look at the Seder plate, you know where the maror lays? In the center. So if anyone knows a little Kabbalah, or the structure of the spheres, if maror should be gevura, maror is harsh, it's severe. It should be in the left path. In the infrastructure of both the human body and the cosmic order, you have right, left, and center. So right would be love, severity or judgment would be left, and compassion would be in the center. That's the structure. Right brain, left brain, center brain. So maror, which is bitter herbs, seemingly belongs in the left, but it's in the center. So the explanation given is because we eat bitter herbs not to remember pain. We eat bitter herbs is to feel another person, and it's compassion. And if it happens to be pain, it's empathy to another person's pain, it's sensitivity. So empathize is a second element that you bring to the table. Now, obviously, just to be practical, you're going to get up there and sit by the table and say, listen, I'm here to empathize with you all. It's going to sound a little weird and may even sound patronizing. So, this has to come across in a little more diplomatic way. But the idea is that we're here to feel and care about each other. Now, the benefits of this are tremendous. Because no matter what mood you're in, say you're in a terrible mood, you're depressed, you're angry. If you feel that if you're told that now you need to think about someone else, not about yourself, and you're obligated to, it forces you to stop dwelling on your own and wallowing in your own misery. So a key to freedom is not always waiting till everything is working. Sometimes it's doing something that frees you from the traps that you have within you. So some people say, I can't be happy because I'm sad. But maybe if you were happy, you wouldn't be sad. You ever hear that one? I can't sing because I'm sad. But maybe if you sang, you'd be happy. Sometimes locking ourselves up and isolating ourselves only amplifies and makes any problem worse. So Seder night, we're told a new energy enters into the universe, a transcendent energy, a freeing energy. So on this day, this night, when you're sitting in the Seder, say to yourself, tonight, for a few hours, I'm not going to think about my needs. I'm going to speak to the person sitting near me or to the other people at the table. Let people share something. I want to be sensitive to someone else. It's a nice exercise. You'd be surprised what happens when you do such things. So that's number 2. That's the empathizing. There's a Talmudic statement that says, Kol hamispalel ba'at chavere hu nenat tchila. The one who prays for another person in need will be answered first. So interesting trick. Instead of praying for your needs, you pray for someone else. It says God will answer your needs first. What does that mean? Obviously, it's not a gimmick. It means that when you empathize and you don't focus on yourself, a channel opens up. Think of like exercise. The heart The human being has what we call inside our chesed, love. But love can sometimes be concealed, or it can be like a dormant or latent. When you exercise your love by showing love to someone else, suddenly love emerges, and you have love in your life. So it's not just what you give to another. By giving to another, it ends up giving back to you. That's one of the tricks of the trade, that of how we transcend, of how we grow. Sometimes you're not in the mood, so you do it anyway. You do something kind to another person, that opens up the channels of kindness in our life. I know it's counterintuitive, because most of us think, well, one second, I got to get into the mood, I have to be in the state of mind. You know something? Sometimes it's good to do something because you're obligated to do it if it's a good thing. Because we're not always going to be in the mood to be sensitive to others. So Passover tells us, be sensitive even if you're not in the mood. And you know something? It opens up a door and you suddenly realize, hey, I could be sensitive. And I don't have to be trapped by my mood. Now, is it always possible? Obviously, there are times that we're really difficult, but we can try. And it's a powerful way of helping yourself is by helping others. And you look, whenever you talk about happiness, I think it was Henry James that wrote that happiness happiness never comes to someone who's looking for it. You look at happy people, they never look for it. They do things, and happiness emerges. Try to do something. If you're not a happy person, what are you going to do? Buy something? Yeah, you can find moments of like sugar-coated moments that will give you certain satisfaction for the moment. But the state of happiness comes when you help others, when you give to others, when you're not focusing on yourself. So it's counterintuitive, but it's a second Seder. S-E, so we have the speak and we have the empathize. Then comes number 3. Number 3 is dip. Okay? Dip, D-I-P. I know, I'll explain what it means. During the Seder, we dip twice. And we actually, one of the 4 questions is, why is this night different than all? Why do we dip twice? Once, everyone knows the song, Maror and Charoisas. The bitter herbs in the Charoisas is that conglomerate mixture of wine, nuts, apple, all this stuff that we stick in there. And the second time we dip is Amar Charesis, and the tzibele is Salzwasser. The onion or the potato in there are others, but the 2 that we say in the questions, we say once is the bitter herbs in the charosis, and the other one is the onion or the potato, the vegetable in salt water. That's what we say. Now, yes, some dip also when it comes to the wine, when it comes to the plagues, and there's the dipping of the egg in the salt water as well. But the 2 that are the main ones are referred to are the 2 I just mentioned. So dipping is taking place several times throughout the Seder. What's the significance of dipping? In Hebrew, the word for dipping, do anyone knows the word for dipping? Tefillah. Tefillah. Not tefillah as in prayer, but in Hebrew, tet, vav, yud, lamed, hey. It means to immerse. When we say a person immerses in a mikveh, in a ritual bath, that's called tefillah b'mikveh. Well, now, what does this word to dip or immerse mean? So this is a very interesting concept, and it's very much a critical component to the whole Passover experience. We see ourselves as self-contained creatures. No? When we think about it, we realize we're dependent on God, on oxygen, on on people, our parents. But left to your own resources, you wake up in the morning, you don't feel the umbilical cord tugging at you. You don't feel dependency on others. You feel a certain self-contained. You're a healthy person. Obviously, God forbid someone's not healthy. Obviously, he's going to be dependent. But there's a certain sense of self-contained, contained existence, reality. The idea of dipping something is immersing in something beyond yourself. So the example given in the Talmud and in the Kabbalah, in mysticism, is the difference between fish in the sea and creatures on land. What's the distinction between them? Fish in the sea are always aware of their source. They never are disconnected from it. They're always immersed in it. Not only aware of it, they're immersed in it. To the point that when you look at an ocean or a sea, you don't even know what creatures are inside there. Once in a while, you may see a fish jump out, but who would imagine what kind of world is submerged beneath the ocean, beneath the seabed? Creatures on land, even though they're dependent on oxygen, but they don't seem dependent. They're not immersed in anything. So the Kabbalists explain that these represent two worlds. One they called Alma Diskasya, the hidden worlds, and one is called Alma Disgaya, the revealed worlds. An analogy would be analogous to the difference between thought and speech. In thought, the waters of your idea submerge any letter or any expression. When you speak or write, the letters begin to emerge. So think of it like if you pushed away the sea, the objects within it would emerge. But as long as they're immersed, there's a certain type of seamlessness, and connection. So to take this a step further, basically fish in the sea, the reason that we don't need shchita, we don't need to slaughter them the same way that animals are slaughtered in the Jewish law, is because they're pure. They're all day, 24/7 in a mikveh. They're constantly submerged in their source of life. They're always aware that there's a source. Imagine what life would be like, what we would be like, what people on earth would be like if we always knew that we were put here. We were immersed in some higher reality, not our own. That's what immersion is about. It's a reminder that there's a concealment. We don't see the source of existence, the source of life. We don't see our mission, we don't see our design. We sense that we're self-made people. And it takes work to orient ourselves to thinking about what's my purpose? What's the greater good? What's the higher calling? So when we immerse in a mikveh, and similarly the dipping on a Passover Seder is about reminding us that the idea of immersing in something beyond you. There's a beautiful verse in the book of Isaiah. We actually read it in the Haftarah, the last day of Passover. It's a classic, everyone knows this verse. Well, many people know this verse. It says, "And a day when the world will be filled with divine knowledge," and Isaiah adds, "as the waters cover the sea." What does he mean by the waters cover the sea? Because you could have knowledge, but you don't necessarily mean you're immersed in knowledge. You could know things, but it doesn't mean you're one with what you know. You know? The ultimate objective in knowing things, in knowing is you become intimate with what you know, like the fish in water. Now I'll give you an example. Bertrand Russell once said, when he was asked, "How could you behave unethically? You're a professor of ethics." So he responded, "I also teach mathematics, and I'm not a triangle." You know. And Maimonides, in contrast to that, says, you want to recognize who's a wise person? Don't look at their oratory skills, brilliance, intelligence, scholarship. Look at how he or she walks and talks, eats, sleeps, deals with details in their lives. Meets people. Not when they're at their best and they're using their minds. Then their minds are exalted. You want to know, does it permeate them? Are they one with their knowledge, or is their knowledge in one place and their behavior in another? In Judaism, we're not perfect human beings. Nobody lives up to all their ideals. But you don't make a philosophy out of our weaknesses. It means that we recognize that the goal is seamlessness. And if you want an example, the children. Look at the children sitting at the Seder. That's why they're there, to remind us of something. Children are seamless. What you see is what you get. The first time a child becomes duplicitous, we'll never remember the first time, because once you taste from that fruit, you can't go back. But where does a child learn to lie the first time? From adults. It sees his parents lie. It sees people are duplicitous. For a child, initially, if you were able to interview a child, the child would be shocked by it. And initially, when you, for example, if you tell a child something that's not true, first time, look at the child's reaction. The child, like, 1 second. Now, a child doesn't have the courage and the strength and as respect for his parents, so it's not going to challenge. But something's wrong. Like, like you tell a child, don't tell anyone what's going on here. Children don't usually listen, but now I understand discretion and so on is an important thing, but children learn that there are suddenly two worlds. Very easy to get a child to tell every secret. The younger the child, of course, the better, because the child doesn't know about two worlds. What you see is what you get. There's no echad b'peh, echad b'lev. There's an expression. One thing in the mouth and one thing in the heart. Basically backstabbing. The idea that I could smile to you and then stab you in your back. We take for granted that's the world in which we live, a world of sharks. But that's not necessarily the healthy world. It's a world that's not healthy. So adults like to believe that, or some like to believe, that children are adults in the making, they're naive, and we're waiting to produce them into adults. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe they are where it's at, and we're the ones that are screwed up. And maybe Passover is a good opportunity for us to go back and rediscover what it means to be real. What it means to be seamless, what it means to be a fish, like a fish in the sea, and just fulfilling your purpose because you're connected to your source, you're connected to you're attached to it. Now, of course, we all for 9 months were like a fish in the sea. We were immersed in the embryonic fluids of our mother's womb. The Torah asks the question, why? Why didn't God, for example, it says Adam and Eve were created as adults. Why do we need 9 months, spending 9 months? Now I understand, scientifically, physiologically, that's how you develop. But God could have done the whole thing differently. He could have made, there are animals, there are creatures, that the gestation period is just hours, not 9 months. What's the point of 9 months? And the mystics explain, because before we enter the world of the dry, arid world of land, where we will be disconnected from our source, God wants to give us a chance. So He immerses us into something that 9 months in our psyche is planted the idea of being nurtured and being enveloped and engulfed in something greater than us. We all gravitate to water. Beachfront property is very expensive. People like to go summer vacate near water. And there are different theorists. There are scientists, evolutionary scientists, that theorize that the reason is because we were once amphibians. So we like to have certain psyche still gravitates to water. I'll submit to you not that reason, but the reason that the Torah says, which is that just like we individually, the microcosm was created and born, first we're born immersed in water, and then we emerge onto land and become separate and self-contained individuals. The universe too, it says, in the beginning God created the water, mayim b'mayim, the entire earth was covered in water. And then God said, let me separate between the higher waters and the lower waters, let the earth emerge, let all the creatures emerge, let the vegetation emerge. In order for us to now come and do what Isaiah says at the end of times, fill it back with water. But this time, not in the way, God forbid, destroying it, but taking this earth and life that seems so disconnected and reconnecting it. So our purpose in life, in a sense, is to re-immerse something that was once immersed. Very similar to how we grow up as children. In the early stages of our lives, as I said, 9 months were completely encompassed by the waters. Then the child is born. You cut the umbilical cord, the child begins to grow. But it's still not independent. Physically it's independent, but the child needs its parents, it's nurtured. A healthy home is again like water, immersed. You ever feel the sense when you, like, for example, go in water, go swimming, something like going underwater, you suddenly, the silence, there's a certain sense of belonging, you just feel a certain connection. And obviously we can't live underwater, but you feel it, you feel the embrace. And how many poems and novel and love stories have been written about being engulfed, like being surrounded by water. Love. The immersion in water is always a symbol of love. The hug, the embrace. Someone completely embracing you. Water embraces you completely from head to toe. When you go into the mikveh, People talk about the experience of feeling like going back into the womb, being immersed in something sacred, something beyond you. And it's also true in anything. Standing in front of a beautiful sight of nature and just letting go, and you feel let the nature encompass you instead of you controlling it or you trying to observe it. Let go. Let the whole thing just lift you up to another place. There's a certain cleansing, a certain word for it, a certain purity that we experience when we feel that. Maimonides writes that a mikveh is not a bathtub. It's not a shower to clean yourself. It's mei hadas haTorah, he says. It's immersing yourself in the pure waters of knowledge. In Torah, knowledge, knowing, interestingly, is a word used for intimacy, sexuality, and for water. Because it's the idea of sensing where object and subject melt into one, and you no longer feel that I'm experiencing something, but I am it. The human being, not the human becoming. You be. You are. Not just you're becoming something. And that's ultimately, whenever you're really in a real situation, you ever have a situation where you're so immersed in something, you don't even realize you're hungry, you don't know what time it is, you don't even sense yourself. The experience has completely taken over. And then as soon as you sense it, you in a way miss that experience of just being in it, being in what they say, in the zone. This happens. This can be writers, artists, musicians. It can happen to anyone. It's a sense of allowing yourself to be. We live in such a fast food world that we especially in New York. How often do you just step back to be, just be, without becoming something, without going here. You are where you are. Be there, be at peace with it. You're here for a reason, this moment. That's called immersion. You're not rushing to the next thing or the next text message and so on. You are where you should be right now. Block everything else out. It says when a person, for example, studies Torah, they shouldn't even be able to hear the telephone or hear any distraction. Now you become one with the wisdom. And that's the ultimate goal. Not just that you study something and there's you and the knowledge, but you become one with the knowledge. That's the real significance of the dip. And Passover Seder allows us the opportunity to get to that place. So it's symbolic, but it also teaches us about this type of immersion. Now, if you're blessed and you're sitting around a table with family and friends that are truly loving each other, there's a certain type of immersion going on. There's the hug, the embrace of the table. And this is also true even if people are not family. If you're a host, it's all up to the host. If you create an environment where everyone feels welcome and there's no edge from the top, there's a certain comfort. You go to a party or you go to an event, you can immediately tell is there tension in the room or not. When people who are the hosts, the people in the room are comfortable with themselves and they let everyone be comfortable, so there's no, let's say, hierarchy, who's here and who's there, everybody just feels a warm evening. That's a form of immersion. We crave moments like this, but we're also fearful because we often are hurt. We're often in rooms and groups where someone wants something. There's always an agenda. But that type of idea where you can be in a room, you can be with someone, and there's no agenda. They don't want anything from you. You're not going to be exploited. They just accept you for who you are. That's immersion. That's what a mother does when she carries her child for 9 months. It's unconditional embrace, love. And that's what healthy parents do in the early years of our lives. And later in life, when we leave our homes and we cut the umbilical cord the second time, this time metaphorically, the goal is also not just to separate, but to reconnect, to go into a world of fragmentation and discover unity. That's how the mystics put it. Find harmony within diversity. So diversity can end up becoming divisiveness, or you can find harmony in it. A good analogy sometimes in the way the Kabbalah says about the world of Tohu, which you may have heard, the chaotic world, the breaking of the vessels. Think of it like this: a most beautiful, grand, cosmic musical composition. And you and I and everyone here had the privilege to hear this beautiful music. You'll never forget it. Okay? Then suddenly something happens. The composer decides to split apart all these musical notes and just scatter them all over the earth. From the sky. Takes the composition, and now the musical notes are all over the place. And he tells us, your mission is to find these notes and bring them back together. Recreate the music. This is the analogy giving for the spiritual concept of unity and how this universe emerged. The fragmentation of this universe is quite deliberate. It's because God, the grand composer, said, I want you now to create the music. But you all heard the music once, so you know what it's like. It'll resonate. When you'll hear songs, it'll resonate. Your job is when every person you meet, every encounter you have, every individual experience is a potential musical note. But it's concealed. It's locked. As Michelangelo said, I see the angel in the marble, trapped in the marble. I carve and set her free. Our mission is to set the angel free, to set the note free. Which means you have to see yourself as a piece of music, and you have to look at everyone else as a musical note. And realize that you need them as they need you, because the composition is not complete without each note being played. I can't be complete without your playing your note, and you can't be without me, and everyone's indispensable. Imagine if everyone on this earth sends that type of immersion, that we're really just musical notes in a large composition. 7 billion notes. So I know it's difficult to begin with 7 billion. Let's start with a room like this, 20. Or your Seder table. If everyone at the Seder table can align themselves and experience that musical note through speaking, step 1. E, empathizing. That we empathize with each other. And 3, as we're saying, to dip, to immerse yourself in this higher music. Then you're beginning to create real redemption. And the fact is, look, it's not a numbers game. If 5 people can do it, 50 people can do it. And if 50 people can do it, 50 million people can do it. And you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. Seder table is an opportunity to create that microcosm in your world. And insist on it. Again, hopefully you can find a table where everyone's receptive to play along. I'm sure you'll find some people who are skeptical and laugh at the whole thing. So you have to figure out how to deal with that child. They're also one of the 4 children. And then, so that's the significance of dip. Now, of course, all this can be elaborated upon. I'm just trying to lay it out, the 5 steps. So I've done S-E-D, and we have E-R, Seder. So speak, empathize, dip. The next is E, another E. So E is edify or enlighten, which is a synonym. I mean, you could also say educate, but the difference between edification and education, if you look in the dictionary, has a certain enlightened element to it. You know, you can educate someone in many things, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's illuminated. So E is the process of not just teaching, but illuminating. It's actually an expression that we read later in the book of Leviticus. It says, Emor ala koyanim. God says to Moses to speak to the priests. So Rashi says, Lahazir hagdelim ala ktanim. That the adults, Lahazir literally means that they should caution the young ones. Education is a form of telling them the pitfalls, the fears, the challenges life presents. But there's an interesting point here. The word lahazir doesn't just mean to caution. It also comes from the word Zohar. The book of Zohar, the book of splendor. Zohar in Hebrew means illumination. Kizoyer harakia. Something illuminates like the radiance of the sky, like the glow of the heavens. So, the same word that can be seen as educating to caution also is to illuminate. True education is illuminating. So just as I said before, there's the speaking, where there's the dialogue going on during the Haggadah. A big part of it is V'gada Tolevincha, to teach, but to illuminate. So think of it this way, that every time you say something to someone, ask yourself the question, did I just say something, or did I also say something enlightening? You know, here's a good litmus test, which can be sometimes uncomfortable because no one's going to really share their honest feelings about it. But, you know, there are people you meet that every time you meet them you feel empowered. You feel uplifted. And there are people you meet, I'm going to have to say this, admit the fact that drain you. Every time you talk to them you feel despair, you feel down, you feel drained. I remember as a first time I ever went to a meeting. A meeting. I know it's always the first time you go to a meeting. Children don't go to meetings. But adults start going to meetings. I remember I was at a meeting, I said, well, what's the point of this meeting? So a senior guy said to me, this is called an office meeting. Let me just tell you the rule with meetings. Meetings either drain you or they empower you. And then you know whether there was any value to the meeting or not. So I said, there's nothing in between? He said, no. If it's neither, it's draining. So it was an interesting way to look at it. It was a little humorous. Now, of course, there are people you meet that can drain you and sometimes empower as well. So it's not black and white. My point that I'm trying to make is, what do you think you do to others? When you speak to someone, obviously to ask someone, tell me, do I drain you or do I empower you? Very few people are going to tell you, listen, you're just a pain in the butt and you drain, and every time I speak to you, I feel bad, But I'm sure if you really want to find out, you can find out, because it's interesting. It's interesting how we are perceived by others. And these things you can't fool. When you feel down about yourself, it comes across, even if you don't say anything. It's your attitude to things. Like someone comes to you and says, I have a new idea. What's your usual attitude? Do you throw cold water at it? Or do you say, something? Go for it. I think you got what it takes. I don't just mean patronizing the guy. There are different types of people. There are people, every time you feel enthusiastic or somewhat eager to do something, there are people who always remind you, hey, we've been there already, you're not going to get anywhere, and they make sure to demoralize you. And then there are those that illuminate, edify, educate, enlighten. So here we are at the Seder table, and it could either be a draining experience, or a comedy, as I mentioned, or it can be uplifting. And the question is what you're going to do about it. So I think the fourth step is to be an enlightener, a walking menorah. I know Passover is not Hanukkah, so we don't celebrate menorah, but we also light candles. As a matter of fact, we light candles, the holiday candles, and then later when we go to the door to greet Elijah, we go with the candles. So being a walking menorah is quite a beautiful thing to be. That wherever you go and whoever you meet, you enlighten them, you warm them. And I said, it's probably going to be difficult to get people to tell you what you do or what you don't do, but let's put it this way. If you never hear someone complimenting you that you empower them, you can rest assured they're probably doing the opposite. So that's pretty much of a sign. So maybe it's a good time to make effort to try to enlighten, to try to empower, to try to edify, to try to elevate. These are all the E's. And the other synonyms? Illuminate, but illuminate with an I. Okay. It's all right. We got the words. Enlighten is good enough. So that's the E. And then the last and final step, which is Zeicha liyetzias Mitzrayim. We remember, the R, to remember. We remember. The power of memory is underestimated. I can speak from experience. My claim to fame was I remembered for many years. When the Lubavitcher Rebbe would speak, his birthday was actually this week, Tuesday. It was his 110th birthday. He was born in 1902. So my job was, with a small group of people, to do something that all of us once did, our grandparents once did, but not now, like 3,000 years ago. They would remember. When Moses taught, how was it documented? There were no pen and paper. There were no tablets. There were tablets, but of a different sort. You had to engrave messages. So there was no easy way to writing. There was no writing at all. There was a little papyrus. There was a Sefer Torah scroll. But when someone was speaking, there was no quick way to jot it down. So most of it was remembered. It was memorized. And some was jotted down, like notes either was engraved on tablets, or they had some ink and parchment, but how much parchment could they have created in the wilderness? So for approximately 1,500 years, the process of education was through teacher-student. As a matter of fact, Socrates, which is approximately 1,500 years after Moses, was the one that said that when they began to, not mass-produce, but they began to document things on tablets, he says the downfall of civilization, because people are no longer going to communicate. They're going to put it down. Jeff Bezos of Amazon, when he unveiled the Kindle, and everyone was yelling at him, he's destroying civilization because books. He says, I want to remind everyone that books didn't exist, And he said that technology is anything that was invented after you were born. Right? So basically, books, there was a time before Gutenberg's press that there were no books. And Socrates said exactly the same thing. And Socrates wasn't even talking about mass publishing that we have today. So some argue, like Oscar Wilde says, that it's not that the rate of illiteracy has lowered over the ages. It's only that today illiterate people know how to read. That's how he put it. So obviously there's something, junk in, junk out. Technology does not make you intelligent. It makes it easier to process information, to access information. But if you don't have a mind of your own, the computer's not going to do it for you. So there was a time where we remembered. I did this for many years. On Shabbat and holidays, when there were no tape recorders or notes taken, we had to remember. So I've learned a few tips of memory. We remember, we say Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim. The word is Zeichel, to remember. At the end of every morning service, there's a thing called the 6 remembrances. We remember the leaving of Egypt, we remember Amalek, memory, and Yizkor. For those of us who've lost a parent, Yizkor is one of the most sacred prayers on Yom Kippur and also the last day of Passover, different the holidays. We remember. What is this power of remembering? So let me share a story with you. And you'll see the power. There was the fifth Chabad Rebbe, his name was Rabbi Shalom Dovber, who lived in the city of Lubavitch in the former Soviet Union. This was Belarus, White Russia, what it was once called. One day, one Shabbos, he was at his meal, and there was a special guest that came to town that weekend. And the special guest was a friend of the Rebbe's when they were children. And they hadn't seen each other for over 25 years. Those days you didn't just travel around much. The last time they saw each other was when his father of the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, his name was Reb Shmuel, was the Rebbe Marash, was the Rebbe. So it was very interesting, intriguing for the Chassidim, for the disciples, the students, to see this great reunion between these good friends that were once such close. They were always close friends, but they hadn't seen each other. So he was invited to the Shabbos table. They were sitting at the table. And meanwhile, they hadn't even said hello to each other. They were just both there. Suddenly, this gentleman, elderly gentleman, starts singing, chanting a melody. Starts singing a song. He began singing a song that was a song that most people were not familiar with at the table. And as he really immersed himself in the song, they suddenly see that the Rebbe of Shalom Ber, Rebbe Rashab, closes his eyes and slowly went into some trance. Like he was mesmerized. He transported to another time and place. It was very clear. And the song went on, very moving, very stirring melody. Finally, the song was over. He finished singing, and the Rebbe's eyes were still closed, for another moment. Slowly he opened his eyes, and he looked at his friend across the table, and he said to him, the first words, two lifelong friends said in over 25 years, he said to him 3 words. He said, do you remember? "Du gedenkst, do you remember?" And his friend said to him, yes, ich gedenk, yes, I remember. That was it. The meal was over. Shabbos ended. That gentleman passed away that night. So later they asked the Rebbe, what happened? What was going on? What the song and this and the remembering? Why didn't you guys say hello to each other so many years? So the Rebbe said to them, he said that 25 years ago, the last time we saw each other, we sat at the table of my father. And the last thing that we connected with was the song that he sang. That was the song that he sang then. We sang it together. And it was deeply moving then. And when he began singing the song now, I went right back to where it was 25 years ago. As if no time had passed. And all I needed to know was that he remembered, that we were both. And once he said yes, we didn't even have to say hello. We never said goodbye. The memory, the connection to the song melted away all the separation of time and space. And the love, the connection was there completely. It's a very powerful story because we all have moments, magical moments in our lives. Moments you'd love to be able to bottle, replicate, initiate, generate. Doesn't always work that way. But those magical moments you don't forget. It says it could be a split second, but it's forever with you. And imagine if there was a song sung at that moment that whenever you like, you sing that song, you can go back to that power. The best of times, the worst of times. That would be something. To be able to use memory to go back, not supposed to go back, to transcend time and space. So there are experiences in life that we all look forward to. Usually they just happen. But I'm here to tell you that you could generate them if you recognize that part of your soul. It could be through a song, it could be through a connection. It's only the real connections you make. Those are magical moments. Those moments where something real happened. It wasn't connected to a transaction or money or anything that was instant gratification or anything that just like is born and dies. It's the real connections we make. Something someone may have told you years ago. May have been a mentor, may have been a teacher, may have been a friend, may have been a child, may have been someone you love. These things don't disappear. I remember when my father passed away 6.5 years ago. So, once your father's not there physically, it's like the foundation of a building. You suddenly start realizing what kind of role he played. Because, father, it's an invisible role in many ways. And there are things that today that I connect to that I never connected to even in his lifetime. Is those eternal moments, those special moments. If God blessed us, God blessed you, you had a home, you grew up in a home where you had many such moments. The moments that shape us. And those are moments that we can retrieve and call upon at any given time. For many, actually, a Seder table has that type of power. It reminds you of the Seder of your parents or your grandparents. For some, unfortunately, the Seder was not a pleasant experience. Dysfunctional or abusive home Seders are not usually that pleasant. They're more like a cover-up. But many have had beautiful experiences. Remembering how I, as a child, asked my father the questions, and then as I grew older and my children asked me the questions, and now I see my grandchildren. There's a big power to that. And everyone here has ability to access such memories. So the idea of remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim, initially it could seem like, why are we trying to remember? I barely can remember what I did yesterday. Why am I trying to remember what happened 3,000 years ago? Because we're not talking about some dogmatic, some ritual to remember. We're talking about connection. Remembering is connecting to things that matter. It's awesome to think that you sit at a Seder table, and as your father and mother and your parents tell you the story, you tell the story to others. And they were children, and it was told to them. And their grandparents told it to them. And it went through an unbroken chain. That's such tremendous power. Unfortunately, what's left for many of us is just a relic. It's a relic. It's like something washed up on the shore. We know it has something, some nostalgia. We don't really relate to it. Which brings me back to the message of relevance. That joke they tell? This guy, there was a wealthy man in the town. He was very charitable. He had a custom. He would invite people for a meal. At the end of the meal, anything you want, you see at the table, you can take is yours. A goblet, a plate, tablecloth, whatever. And people would come from all over, and that was his custom. So, many poor people at the table. Some people never saw such wealth. They had a great meal. And at the end of the meal, of course, everyone's thinking, what am I going to take? What am I going to ask for? And everything was granted. So one wise guy was thinking, something? I don't just want one thing. I want a lot of things. But he's only asking me one thing. So what is the secret behind all his wealth? Maybe I could ask for that. That way I'll be able to just have it all. So he notices that every time the course was changed, a new course was delivered to the table. Served, right? Sorry. I'm looking for all these words. Served. The host would ring a small little bell, and a waiter would bring the food. So he said, "That's it. I'm going to ask for the bell." So at the end of the table, everyone asked. This one asked for a fork. This one for a goblet. This one for a wine bottle. etc. And he comes and he's smiling, he's going to outsmart everybody. He says, I like the bell that you have. The wealthy man looks at him, okay, you want the bell? Take the bell. He smiles. Anyway, he goes home, this pauper. He says to his wife, our problems are solved. I mean, obviously this is a chelam story, you have to use a little imagination. Our problems are solved. Set the table. She says, I have nothing to set the table with. We don't even have a table. Says, okay, pull out whatever, milk cartons. Everything will be solved. And he starts ringing the bell and ringing the bell and ringing the bell. And nothing happens. So of course he runs back to the wealthy guy, you fooled me, etc., etc. Sometimes you're given something, you inherit a relic. And you're told this thing, you put on tefillin. Some people find old tefillin in their basements. Or a talit. Or a menorah. Or a Seder plate. People dig things up. And they say, hey, this once created magic. That's what my grandparents told me. They bring it up to they set and they start ringing the bell, and it doesn't happen. Because obviously there's a soul behind it. You can't just rely on the relics. Unfortunately, a lot of religion, especially Passover, is full of a ritual that people don't have any clue. I mean, there's reasons for it. The bitter herbs. I'd like you to challenge your table. Why do we eat bitter herbs? So everyone's going to say to remember the bitterness in Egypt. So let's be frank. First of all, are we going to compare little bitter herbs in your mouth to slavery in Egypt? I mean, is that a joke or something? And second of all, why recreate bitterness? The bitterness is over. Now we've been freed. We're celebrating freedom. Why do we have to go back there? I mean, so most of us don't mind. Okay, listen, they ate bitter herbs. Who cares? They ate them, fine. I'm not even suggesting that it changes everything. But something, that's a subtle message that one day the children at the table will say, you know what? I don't know what's matter. It's like the emperor with no clothes. They're eating bitter herbs. There's nothing here. So it should be a surprise that so many of our next generation are not interested in Judaism at all, because they're not interested in just holding on to a relic. Some of us don't mind. Some of us say, okay, great. So without finding deeper relevance, we can be depriving some people who may never want to perpetuate this. I'm not even getting to negative experiences around the Seder table. I'm talking about so it's critical, we're responsible to make it come alive. And there's plenty of meaning behind the bitter herbs. A profound meaning. I mentioned one, empathy. It's about empathy. It's like saying, in my mouth, I will feel, it's not so comfortable, I will feel someone else's pain. So it's symbolic, obviously. And as I said earlier, in general, what are we recreating? We're creating things that happened thousands of years ago. No, Mitzrayim is right now in your life and my life. We have inhibitions, we have fears, we have Mitzrayim, Meitzar. We have things that constrain us. We have things that inhibit us, that limit us. We have addictions. We have fears. All the other synonyms that you can apply. Bring that to the experience, and you tell others to bring it. Then you have something that will come out that's relevant. Now, obviously, there's so many layers and so many details of the Haggadah, which, I've done the Seder all my years of my life, and every year I find new things, but I'm looking for them. And it's fascinating. There's depth and depth. And layers and layers. And as I said, I covered just basically certain principles here, the 5 main principles that I discussed today, the methods. But I have the 15 steps of the Seder I've done the 4 cups of wine, all looking to decipher and make it relevant. If you can't find it on our website, please send me an email. I'll be happy to send you a bunch of links. It's very easy to find. It's really, I think it could be very helpful, because I really worked at it to make it come alive. And whatever it may be, you could focus on this step, you could focus on the matzah, on the wine. They all have tremendous messages. And I think no matter who you are, how traditional you are, or not traditional, there's always depth to be found. Just today, I got a call from a writer, a journalist from the Philadelphia Inquirer. She was going tonight to a seminar on the Omer, based on my book. So he told me a Reconstructionist rabbi in Philadelphia was doing a seminar on the Omer, which basically we start counting the second day of Passover, and the same thing. It's also a ritual. She was asking me, what's the significance of this counting? What, you just count? But the word sipur, by the way, means to count. It also means to tell a story, like Haggadah. Very similar. As I said, Pesach is a mouth that speaks. Pesach. Paroi is also pera, a bad mouth. Pera. So you can speak good things, you can speak bad things. You see the power of speaking. Counting is more than just counting, it's refining. So there's a whole dimension of relevance in Judaism that unfortunately is not so known today, which is why we have this big split. You have religious people and you have spiritual people. They say in America, the surveys say that something like 90% of Americans say they believe in God and have some form of spirituality. And 45% associate with religion. Now that's not a small discrepancy. Why? Because religion is seen as ritual, without the SPI in front of it. And spiritual is about refinement, is about transcendence, not about ritual. And unfortunately you'll find most spiritual people are not that religious, and most religious people are not that spiritual. One of my goals in life is to try to change that. Because to me it's a fusion of tradition and the soul. It's like a body and a soul. Now if you only have the soul, yes, you could have the spirituality, but we live in a physical world. So there's a need to ground it, there's a need for concretization, there's a need to do things that have a mitzvah also has some tangible element. Like if someone says to you, my heart, you go to them for an investment, let's say in your business, and they say, my heart's with you, I love what you do, you're the best, but they're not ready to sign the bottom line. In this world, that's not considered to be necessarily achievement. It means, their heart is with you, but they're not ready to put their money where their mouth is. On the other hand, just to have ritual without spiritual, body without soul, unfortunately that's a corpse. It's not alive. So what you need is a fusion of the two. Passover offers us that opportunity. It's filled with tradition, filled with beautiful traditions. At the same time, it also has deep spirituality, and that's what we have to bring into it. And I want to wish all of you to be the opportunity. You have the opportunity, the gift. I think it's responsibility, because you can actually change people in this fashion. You can, because whatever you say may be a little more than what someone else may have heard. I can't tell you how many people have told me, I wish I knew this when I was a child. I wish someone had told me in the Seder that there was this deeper experience. Many people have told me this. I will say I grew up in a very traditional home. I grew up in a very traditional home, and thank God it was a loving home. But most of the ideas of the deeper elements of the Seder I learned as I grew older. I sensed something, and some people sometimes did say something. But being that it was a beautiful home, that goes a long way. But God forbid if it was not such a beautiful home, I don't know what my reactions would have been. Would I have even given it a chance? And then when I was a teenager and began to ask questions, more than just the 4 questions, I began to discover there's real depth here. There's unbelievable. And it's not something that some contemporary thinker thought up of. You read, it's written in the books. Go by hundreds of years. Haggadah, I think, is one of the earliest publications in Jewish scholarship. Many types of Haggadahs. It's fascinating. You have the Sephardic type and this type and different customs. But the key thing is to see their soul, and that's when it comes alive and becomes relevant. So there you have it. We have the Seder. We have speak, empathize, dip, enlighten, edify, and remember. These, I believe, are 5 things that if you address them and introduce them, you'll have a different type of Seder. That's my guarantee. Try it out. And hopefully after Passover we can compare notes and see how things worked out. So, my friends, first of all I want to say the class is dedicated to a good friend of ours, grandmother who just passed away, the Ilya Nishmat Ida Bat Chana, grandmother of Eleanor. May her neshama celebrate the Seder with how they celebrate the Seder up there, but I don't think they eat matzah or maror. We have the opportunity to concretize it. And I want to say as well that next week won't be a class because of Passover. I will be in Cape Cod, trying to spiritualize, trying to find some musical notes that have scattered there, try to gather and collect them together. And I hope that each of you, wherever you are, do the same. Remember, do not be a bystander. You're not there just as a recipient. Initiate, lead the way, even if you're not the host. figure out a way to bring something to the table. You have definitely something to share. I have no doubt about that. And we will resume the class the following week, the Wednesday afterwards. Philip is not giving his class tomorrow night. Okay, thank you for that. And we have here the Omer book, which some of you have asked about, popular Omer book, as well as the CD called Soul of the Seder, 15 Steps to Personal Freedom, which I did a number of years ago at the National Arts Club, actually, in Gramercy. It was like a type of, I guess, a mock Seder. I don't know if it was a mock Seder. It was a workshop which went through the 15 steps. And then we have, as I said, resources plenty in Passover that you can all look at. And one more suggestion I would make, which actually I'm lifting from the Rebbe himself many, many years ago. He once said that something that I thought was a very powerful way of putting it. We talk about the 4 children at the Seder. We have the wise one, we have the wicked one, skeptic, we have the Tam, the simpleton, and we have She'eni Yodei Elisha, the one who doesn't know how to ask. And it says, open his mouth, have him ask, have him speak too. But then there's one missing. The 5th child that doesn't even come to the Seder. And unfortunately today there are many of them. And I would say, there's a nice suggestion which I think, if you can encourage someone like that, a nice way to come to a Seder table and give them an experience that they'll remember and want to come back again, I think that would be a great Passover exercise. And as I said, if you pray for someone else, channels open up for you. What better empathy and kindness is to do that? As we say, hey lachmani, let's take it literally. Not just we say it, actually find someone, invite them. And if you're a guest, as the host, I'm sure a host will say, this a person has not come to a Seder before, or would not go to one this year. And then take them under your wing and make it special, make it extraordinary. That's a humble suggestion coming from yours truly. So the 5th son, which, by the way, there's also a 5th cup. You know, Jews, it never ends. There's 4 cups of wine, but then there's a 5th cup. And there's different agreement what this 5th cup is, just for the record. They've been arguing about it still today. Some call it the 5th cup of Eliyahu. Elijah's cup is the 5th cup. Some say there's another cup that's called the 5th cup, because in the 4 cups of wine, which correspond to the 4 messages of freedom, or Lashonis, how do you say Lashonis? 4 expressions of freedom in the Bible, there's a 5th one. So just like there's a 5th son, there's a 5th cup. So there's always a 5th dimension. And when you get there, we'll talk about the rest. There's always more. So I want to wish everybody a very liberating and emancipating and meaningful Passover. You know, more than you've ever experienced. Remember that you're part of it, so you can make it happen. And God should bless everyone with the ability to open up any locked doors or impediments or obstacles that may block our hearts or souls, whatever it is that we need or want in our lives, whether it's blessings, the area of relationships, marriage, finding your soulmate, or children, or parnasa, livelihood, or health. May everybody be blessed in the fullest possible fashion. Remember also, matzah is considered to be bread of faith and also bread of healing. And the Alter Rebbe says the first night is the bread of faith, and the next night is the bread of healing. And he says, because faith that brings to healing is always a healthier form of healing than healing that brings to faith. So, I wish everybody a very healing Passover in a way that doesn't have to address any illness, God forbid. And may we celebrate together. And I'd love to hear, as I said, in a few weeks from now, or if you want to send me an email before that, how your Passover went. If anyone needs assistance finding a Seder, I'll be happy to be available. Tell us what area you're at. Maybe we can help you find something meaningful. And I'll be going tomorrow with my family, my children and grandchildren, to northern Massachusetts, northeastern Massachusetts, southeastern Massachusetts, or Maine? Okay, south of what? Oh, okay. Fine. Anything that's south of one thing is north of something else. That I know, that's for sure. And okay, so everyone have a very happy Passover, kosher for El Pesach, and only blessings. Thank you so much.